Sajeel Qureshi here with another episode of RevOps 500, and today I am really excited to be talking to somebody who I've known for a very long time in different ways in the HubSpot ecosystem. She's a senior director of partner strategy at HubSpot. She's also a TEDx speaker. She's a podcast host like me, better one obviously. She's a writer, and her podcast is, I think, called Owning the Outcome. Sarah McDevitt, welcome to RevOps 500.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here. What an introduction.
It's just your Wikipedia article, Sarah. That's all it is. So, all right. So, Sarah, let's just get right into it. What is your biggest mistake?
I love this question because I have so many to choose from. There's so many to choose from. I think that's what the rest of us call experience, right? As I always say to younger people, the only difference between me and you is 999 more mistakes that we call experience. I really had to think about this one, and I think I had to go back to a mistake earlier in my career because it was, you could say that later on in my career, it's almost a trauma response to the mistake where I made it and then it really embedded in my psyche and kind of steered so much of my career later on. It doesn't sound like a terribly complex mistake or a terribly exciting, but early on in my career, I worked in advertising.
Okay.
I worked in an advertising agency, and it was before the internet was a thing. That's how old I am. It was before the internet was really
Yeah,
taken off.
I've been there.
And I worked as a production manager responsible for the printing of, outdoor advertisements, flyers, that kind of thing. And I was doing a flyer for Burger King at the time. We worked with Burger King, and I printed maybe 500,000 vouchers with a typo in it. And there's nothing worse than you are taking delivery of all of these boxes and someone points out there is a obvious typo in it. And part of my job is to make sure that didn't happen. And I was, you're faced with a fairly expensive printing cost that you have messed
Yeah.
up on, and you are faced with a deadline where your customer wants to get that out to market as soon as possible. So, needless to say, that my heart fell out of some part of my body because it was disastrous at the time.
But we're laughing about it now, or at least I'm laughing about it now. So, anyways, so okay, talk me through about the typo. Did you give like 500,000 people free Whoppers or something like that, or I mean, what exactly did you do?
Well, it was more. That was the thing about it. It wasn't. It was more in the copy setup of what the offer was, right? So it wasn't in the vouchers themselves, but it was more like the headline of what the offer was.
Oh,
So from a brand point of view, it looked, it was not
bad.
good. It was bad. It was bad.
Okay.
And it was my job to make sure that didn't happen, even though I was so early in my career. This was kind of like one of the biggest mistakes that I had made because it was a financial impact.
Yeah, and it's for Burger King. It's not a startup, right? It's a scale up for Burger King. So I mean, and like, I mean, was it like a typo where if you see that word again and again in your career, you remember what that word was, you remember how you spelt it the wrong way or you typed it the wrong way? Do you have those flashbacks all the time when you see it, or?
I don't remember what the word is.
Oh, that's good.
I only remember the feeling.
Oh, the,
They often say that. They often say that about things in life, isn't it? You remember particular things, but you remember the way you felt.
yes,
And
yes.
I remember the way I felt, and I'm sure this is not yesterday. It's many many years ago.
Mm.
I'm sure like the client in Burger King wouldn't even remember this, nor me. But for me, it was one of those things that was like a huge thing in my career journey.
Okay, so this happens. You make the typo. Everybody's getting free Whoppers. I'm just having fun there. But now everybody sees a typo. What does Sarah do next when she realizes she makes a typo? What's that first hour like? What's the next month like? Just what do those steps look like?
Well, so me as a person, I think maybe the worst and best thing about me is that I'm very action oriented. I have a,
Okay.
a bias, as they call it, for action. So I'll probably immediately jump into solutions mode, is like figuring out, what's the cost, what's the time to turn this back around. There was an element of who can I talk to, what favors can I pull, because not only have I made a mistake that's now like, going to cost money, but also there's a deadline to be hit, because there's a period of an offer with a closing date,
Sure. Yeah.
and now like we're losing days on the offer. It's a big time for the company. They have their in-store set up. They have like there's various things that are happening alongside it. So it's not in isolation. It has like a knock-on effect and everything else. So I mean, for me, it was like understanding like what the impact was, what I had done, how that was going to cascade as an effect on everyone else, to understand those pieces. And then it was like literally going line by line to go, how can I mitigate some of this impact? So like, who can I
Okay.
talk to in terms of the printing side? What can I do in terms of discounting? Because now my company has to like foot the bill for this. I was very lucky to have an employer that another person probably would have got fired for that mistake, because obviously there's a reprint cost. But because of relationships, because I did quite a lot of print, I had a very good relationship with the printers. So I was able to pull
Mm,
some favors there. That's because I had been, and I think this has never changed. And I think it's been one of the things for me that matters the most in business, which is the relationships that we have with people are the things that get us out of a tight spot when we fall into them. But if we don't have a good relationship, there is no motive for anyone to want to help you. So in this case, I was very lucky. I can even still remember the name of the printer. His name was Andy, and he was just someone that I did a lot of work with. He was able to then talk internally and figure out how to turn around faster. But I still had to face the truth of having to face the customer and say, I've messed up. And so I decided not to make excuses, not to blame other people, but to just completely own that mistake. Because I thought to myself, if I own it, there's a humanity actually in going to someone, yeah, I know I totally did that. Like I messed
mhm.
up. It's completely my fault. And what's interesting is like the customer almost, I think, on some level felt sorry for me, because I felt really bad about this. But because, and I remember at the time him saying, okay, but at least like we know like what the problem is now, and we have to, and actually it was foundational to the relationship I had with that client, because we had a very good relationship, and it was a relationship built on trust because I was so direct. And he's actually one of the first people that taught me being direct and owning your mistakes actually shortcuts a lot of like going around the houses, so to speak. With people going, it seems like you're trying to get out of this. I think when you own a mistake, people are like, oh, okay, well now we know the mistake happened. So now we're all pulling together, and yeah, it's not ideal. We're not happy about it, but at least you're like jumping into action mode to try and figure it out.
Yeah, and you brought up two really good points there, Sarah, that I want to hit on. One is is when you make a mistake is like the relationship piece of it, and and then the other part is the owning of it, so to speak.
Mhm.
And I mean, so I like look now. Let's fast forward to today, and you work in the partnership ecosystem at HubSpot. So for everybody listening who the half a person who's listening who doesn't know what the HubSpot partner ecosystem is, it's just it's like it's a group of businesses that either develop apps or solutions, or they're marketing agencies that
Mhm.
help businesses grow better with HubSpot. So, and Sarah is kind of in the eye of the storm, trying to make sure that partners their lives are improving, and HubSpot is servicing partners in the right ways possible.
Mhm.
In a nutshell, I mean, she does a lot more than that, but that's kind of the general vibe from us on the partner side. That's the general vibe.
Yeah, yeah.
So now let's talk through that a little bit. So you make this mistake, and you have this, and you feel like the power of relationships is there now. Like, what do you feel about like how do you go about building equity, and do you do that with people in a way so that you build like the foundation, so when a mistake happens, at least you have that foundation of you've gone to the well with this person a few times, and
Yeah.
how do you build it up? And then the second thing is, when does it easy to come across and just say like, hey, I'm a screw up, I messed this thing up. I mean, like how does that speed up the timeline to fixing anything? Like just maybe
Yeah,
talk through those two
so
things.
so I think like one of the things you said, like what were the steps of like when I made the mistake? The end of the day was my best friend, ringing my best friend and telling my best friend I have messed up so bad.
Mm.
And my best friend going, let's go for a drink because it seems like a terrible day. Um and that friend helping me to have perspective on what had happened, right? Because I think
Mhm.
like perspective is so important in these things, right? Like
Sure.
yes, when you make mistakes, it's bad for that business and it causes a cascading effect, and that is, I don't want to discount that. But at the same time, in order to like work through problems and be able to own things, you also need to have perspective on like what's important and like what it is relative to like the world. And so knowing that, like, and it continues to be like a thread for me through my life, is no matter how bad a mistake it is or how bad a time you're having perspective on where that is in the context of the world, like, does help you operate better. Because if you live in fear, fear is not a place that you make progress from. So if you're living from a place of perspective, you can then go, okay, this is not good, and I understand the impact I've had, but I'm not going to shirk away from my responsibility. I'm not going to let that pause me in terms of my response, because I have the perspective that I've been here before, I've seen this, I know how to fix it. So I just think it's important to say that first. But in terms of like building relationships, like it's interesting. It depends on the person. Like first of all, right? There's many people I come across in the ecosystem. They lean more towards the emotional side. They're like, they are building a business that is so personal to them. And so they feel things much more personally. And so their reactions are much more personal. And so for a person like that, I put myself in their shoes. Like when you talk about HubSpot partners, you were talking about businesses that are sometimes built around HubSpot. They're paying people's mortgages. They're paying employees that are paying mortgages. There's children to be educated. I often talk to partners who'll say like, my relationship with HubSpot and the ecosystem, like put my kids through college, or like it paid my mortgage, or whatever it is. So they are sometimes and often small business owners, and I have to put
That's
myself
right.
in their shoes when it comes to problems and how I deal with them, to go, yeah, maybe they're having a very emotional, almost visceral reaction to like a particular situation, but when I can kind of connect them on the human level to say like, yeah, that's not great, and I can, I empathize with them, then that becomes the foundation, I think, of like a good relationship. And then the next step is, how do we practically get past this, right? So if it's a particular problem with their business, how do we like rebuild? How do we like move forward? How do we learn from that? And I often find that partners I start my first call with in an escalation situation, that where they appear mad at us and mad at me, they often end up being like the strongest relationship you have. Because the other thing people want is a person who's not going to shirk away from a conflict when there is one. They want to know how you're going to fix it and the stability, but they also want people who are said they would do something and they do it. And I think one of the things for me that really builds trust is I try and always make sure that I meet what I say I'm going to do. Because I think like, following through on your commitments is like foundational to how you build trust. I think there's other personalities who are less emotional and maybe more facts based. And so in those cases, I have to lean more on the facts, the data points, like, because that then becomes part of the logical mindset of that. And equally, when someone, you're using logic, that also builds trust, because, people want to see that you're like authentic. They want to see that you're using your logic as well. And I think both those things come into play then when you're trying to build kind of relational assets, as I call them, at the start of a relationship. They become very important.
Okay, so there's a lot there, in it's a very thoughtful answer. Thanks for that, Sarah. I mean, like now when it comes to the part about like a relational asset, like what do you mean by that for the people who might not know what that is?
Yeah. So to me, like relational assets are made up like of a couple of different things. One is, I think, I have a number of different things that I think about, and I talk a lot about relational intelligence in business. And for me, we have things like what I call connection capital. Now, connection capital is another word on top of relational assets, but like, let me explain what it is. It's when you have a relationship with someone and you check in with them in a way that isn't contractually obliged. You're not contractually obliged to do that, right? So, you're talking to a customer and you're calling them up and going, "Hey, I'm just like checking in on how things are." I think like that helps. I also think like being proactive about sharing information beyond, again, what's contractually obliged shows the relationship that, hey, I came across this and I thought of you because you were in my mind, and I'm thinking about your business and I care deeply about your business. I think those kind of things, they really help build relationships for sure. They're so important. And then I think, as I said, when things go wrong, following through on your commitments, like they really build up relational assets as well. And it's simple things too, because we're all very busy in the world. And I think understanding and spending some time to get to know people on a human level also adds to that, right? Because when we have this, we talk about AI and things like that in the future, AI can be very transactional, very automated. It's very hard to make a decision to move away from a human that you have a very good relationship with because you consider the person in that situation. It's easier to move away from a very transactional, automated function because you don't have an emotional investment in that situation. And so you are, and the things that you do are the relational assets.
That's interesting that you said that. So, how, I mean, how do you build a, like, how can you build a relation, how do you build relational assets into your daily life to make them like a moat if you're a HubSpot partner or you work at an advertising agency doing print for Burger King? Like, how do you make like a moat out of it where, you become like, like it becomes part of your strategy as a professional, right? Like where,
Mhm.
you might say like for example, no one from the doctor's office ever just calls the patients just to say hi and say how they're doing. But what you're saying is that they should have those relational assets and they should do that, right? Because that way it's hard to move from one doctor to the next and they're not just commoditized to people. So, I mean, how do you build
Well,
this? How do you
that's
build this
one
in?
example. I mean,
Mm.
if we look at the doctor example, I think it's, I think of my own GP as they call them here in Dublin.
General physicians, yeah.
Yeah, I have a very good relationship with my GP because when I come into the office, well, it's broader, and this is the kind of the point as well about it's not just at an individual level, a level from a business perspective, and it's often not in the way that we even as consumers interact with companies.
Yeah.
The broader kind of organizational connection that you have. So when I go into my doctor's office, I met with the receptionist who's saying to me, "How are the kids? They're getting so big now. They know me." Mostly because I have four kids and we're never out of there at a period of time. But they know the kids. They know the names. Instantly, kind of going like they know me as a person, as a family. There's a connection there. Then I go into my doctor and it's a similar conversation about remembering. Now, this is where technology really comes into helping it. Obviously, the doctor doesn't remember everything about me, but they use technology like a CRM and notes to go, the last time she was here, this was happening, blah, 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 right? And I think actually my bank has a similar thing. I think they do because they always say, like, how do they know that? And then the doctor's asking me questions. But like a good example of this is I remember after, my daughter was born, I was not well. And I left the doctor's office after a check-in and I'm walking home and my doctor rings me and goes, "I never checked your blood pressure. Come back. Like I need to check in on that." And I think all those like kind of just caring moments are important. But from a business context, I think equally it's about like looking beyond like your kind of main POC. Because if your
Hmm.
main POC is the decision maker, that's great and you should build a relation with them. But if someone else in the organization is then talking about how you are additive or added value, that's reinforcing that you're not just focused on them as a like very strict, like narrow relationship. you're thinking more broadly about the organization and the way it interacts.
Got it. Okay, so you had this ability to build relationships even at the start of your career. You know, back when you and I were working before the internet even started. Uh, how would you advise yourself now if you went back in time and you had the same situation, and then Sarah in the advertising industry talked to Sarah in the HubSpot partner ecosystem? What would you do differently in that situation again if you made the same typo? How would you handle it differently? I mean, were there any learnings from that at all, or?
So, well, first of all, I don't think that Sarah now would, or Sarah back then would listen to Sarah now, because Sarah back then was, and maybe some people would argue I haven't changed that much. Sarah was probably like highly opinionated and thought that she was probably right, and
Really?
it's the folly of youth, I guess, right? So, the other thing is, I think that Sarah today wouldn't exist without that mistake having happened, right?
Okay.
So, I don't think that I would want. I don't think I would want to change that experience in my career, because I think it's been really important to kind of where I've ended up today. I think more like my understanding of mistakes, um, and I see it through the eyes now as a parent, right? When you're looking at your kids and you're going, it's absolutely essential they make mistakes. Like, it's so important they make mistakes, because that's how we collectively learn. I think the only thing I would say to her is to maybe be a little bit kinder to herself in terms of like the mistake that maybe were unavoidable, in that other people could have, proofread that. I wasn't actually the copywriter, like I was the production manager, right? So there was other people who were accountable to it. But at that moment in time, the buck stopped with me, because I was the last person to see it, right? So I think, and I didn't, and as I said, I don't think shirking blame is ever useful in these situations. You just want to get out. No, no one wants to know who you think is to blame. They just want the problem solved, right? You're wasting time trying to blame people. And also, I think there's a huge amount of respect that people have for taking ownership of a problem and trying to solve it, rather than just wasting your time trying to figure out who you can pass the blame on to. So I would say Sarah needed to go through, and that was the first of many mistakes that Sarah made. But I am a great believer in we're exactly where we're supposed to be
Supposed to
based
be.
on the path that we've taken, and anything kind of might have changed that path. And I love what I do, so I don't think that I would want to change that.
Okay, so let's take a different approach here. So at the start of our conversation, you said that the difference between a young person and a more experienced person is 999 mistakes. Exactly, 999 mistakes. So so if a third party were to look at the 999 mistakes of Sarah and read the book, do you think that and do you think they would all highlight that one as the mistake, as like the biggest one, like the sequel to the movie that didn't need to be made, like the worst thing ever, the worst song, the worst album that the artist ever did? Would most people pick that one? Oh, that's Sarah's, Short Circuit too. That's a really flop movie. But anyway, so
Yeah, yeah.
would people say that, or
No,
would it even come
no.
across as one? They
Really.
wouldn't, right? They wouldn't, right?
Definitely other mistakes that would be
Yeah.
much bigger, from their perspective. But I think the impact of the mistake for me is different as my
Mhm.
experience has grown, because there's much bigger mistakes I've made. But because of the experience I've had on previous mistakes, they have impacted me differently, or maybe less, because I'm better equipped
To handle them.
um, to handle them. And then I would also say that, of the 999 mistakes that I've made, I would say half of them have actually given me the the kind of skills I need to deal with the unpredictability of humans, right? Because things will never go 100% according to plan, mostly because we as humans all interpret information slightly differently. And so the lesson from some of those mistakes was, wow, I should have like thought that that person wouldn't have heard that information the same way that I interpret it, and I should have changed my communication approach or the way that I that landed. And that's been, super useful as well in my career. And like, listen, I'm still learning. Like, I mean, I get things wrong all the time. Um, and it would be disingenuous to say that I'm anywhere close to being like perfect, because I'm not, because the people I interact with all the time are different. And so sometimes you use a base plate how you interact with people, and then you get to know a person and go, that was the wrong approach. I should have done it differently. But that's only, I think, gained through experience.
Yeah, that's interesting. So obviously, yeah, I mean, a typo is a mistake, and but in 999, it's funny that the biggest mistake for us is usually not what the biggest mistake on paper is it? It's usually not like that, right? You on paper you might say, oh well, that's a huge big mistake. It's impact. Like I mean, now you work at HubSpot. It's a global company. You have partners all around the world. I don't know how many, 20,000, 30,000 partners now, something like that. And you're one of those people who has the nuclear codes to all of those partners and can change like policies, SOPs around for all of them. And you're impacting, yeah, 20,000 people, businesses, mortgages, whatever. And and yeah, you guys might make decisions which you feel like, I wish I could have a do over that one, whatever. And those have a lot more far reaching impacts than you can probably even imagine. But like as you said, that because you made these different mistakes earlier on, they equip you better for handling the quote unquote bigger ones. Is that kind of what you were trying to
Yeah,
say, or?
yeah. I mean, totally. I think it's like it's a skill set you develop over time. I mean, I think my role in HubSpot is one of um, being an advocate for partners, being the voice of the partners internally. There's always a big difference between what we wish was true and what is the kind of realities of the world. And we have a responsibility as well to kind of solve for like what's the best for the entire ecosystem. And I love being an input into that process, which I'm very lucky that the way HubSpot works is it's very collaborative. So, there's many perspectives considered. But I think it's interesting you said the nuclear codes. Like, I'm sure like as many times it feels like it's going nuclear for people, right? But there's also, I think, some partners would probably agree with me that sometimes I do have conversations where I go, yeah, that's the way it is, and we don't
Yeah.
always like the way it is. And I think people are kind of like, well, at least you're saying it to my face straight. Like, yes, I'm not going to love this. It is the way it is, though. I think there's strength in that too. It's just going, yeah, you don't love this. I don't love this. Maybe sometimes, but it is the way it is, and that's the way things work. And people, I think, also appreciate that direct approach. Not always, but most of the time.
Yeah, and on that topic, do you feel like that maybe there's a resistance now to have like people just if there's something they don't want to do, or they don't want to, like if they don't want to do, they just shut down. They just don't do it because that's something they want to do. Do you feel like maybe now, I mean, like that happens too often, or are you like, I mean, do you feel like people are willing to have difficult moments, conversations, or do they hide from it too much? What's your just general feeling on that stuff?
Yeah, like I do think if we're talking on a generational level, like 100%, there's like, people, certain generations don't want to like engage with people on the phone. Um, I don't know if there's something wrong with me, but I think that the best place to learn is in those moments, because
Absolutely, yeah, of course.
you learn so much about, because sometimes in some ways those like deeply raw escalations, there's almost like a emotional or social barrier that comes down and people say what they mean. And I think like my role in that is to like really listen to what people are saying, because the problem I find is not really ever the problem that the call starts with. The problem is something else, right? And my job, I feel, is to listen, empathize, but ultimately get to what the other thing is, so we can start to like really deal with like the root cause. I do think though that in general there is like maybe a loss of skills a little bit in human interaction, but I think ironically my personal view is AI gives us the opportunity and the time to re-engage in that skill set and practice, because you know we have spent a lot of time doing stuff and administration and the manual work, and AI is actually going to create, I think, a lot of space for us to reconnect with humans and do that deeper listening. And I think that's something I have found myself. I'm not amazing at, I'm a dyslexic, so I'm not amazing at the writing
Mm.
and reading thing. But I use AI a lot to help facilitate me when it comes to communication, whether, when it's written or I also use Speechify to read things to me. Um, and I find because I'm using that technology, that would have sucked up maybe some time historically for me because I had to know things, whereas now AI is like shortening that for me. That means that I can go into meetings understanding the TLDR of what the problem is, or like, equipped to have a conversation, and the time as well to listen, right? I have the time now to listen to people more deeply. So I think that's been like hugely beneficial. But I don't know that everyone is designed either to like interact in escalation situations. Like I love to live in the margins of chaos, that we joke. Like I'm one of those people that if I was going into an interview in the morning, I'd be excited. I'd be like, God, I wonder what they're going to ask me. Like, I'm delighted by that. When I have an escalation, that excites me because I see it as a problem to solve, not like this insurmountable problem. And that I love that because I learn so much about partners in that space, like what they're going through, like what the challenges are. So I love that. That's like one of my favorite things about the job, but it isn't for everyone. Like that type of communication environment's not for everyone.
Okay, so now you've got me really, really excited a bit here. So yeah, you deal with escalations, you deal with these partner snafus, as we call them, situation normal, all messed up sort of situations.
Mm.
Uh, so you get this. I'm guessing you get this long thread of an email. It's already been going without you. Then Sarah enters the thread, and she's got just all this stuff to process, right? And yeah, you just mentioned you're dyslexic, which makes it there's something to consider there, right? And and you're saying you use AI to help you be better at this very, very human problem.
Mm-hmm.
So walk us through that. You probably got an email in your inbox right now, right? Where it said, okay, like here you got this huge thing. How do you use AI, and how do you synthesize all of that to get to a point where you can say, okay, here's the root of the problem. When I talk to this partner and this user or whatever, here's how I'm going to solve it.
So the first thing I say is that normally when I get a big long email, my response is, "Let's get on a call."
Okay. Yeah.
Because that, well, one, it saves me writing back a big long email, and the other thing is I found we never get anywhere. The main other reason I do that is there is something therapeutic in telling your story to someone else when you're frustrated, right? So I could read the email in great detail, and I often take summaries or TLDRs of emails to understand what the problem is. So yeah, 100%. But I'll always start the escalation with going, I want to hear from you. I want to hear what happened. Tell me what happened. Because the ability to storytell as humans as well is so important because one, it allows us to vent our frustrations and tell our story and get out of frustrations. I need that to kind of really truly sense like what is the problem or like ask additional questions. So for me, like the first step is let's connect on a human level. Then we have the conversation. And then the thing I try and do is ask like clarifying questions to make sure I 100% understand it, 100% understand their point of view. Now, in that moment, if I'm like, that's not going to change, or it is the way it is, I will say, that's not going to change. That is, it's not what you want to hear, but this is the reality of the situation. And then separate them out from, okay, here's a bucket of stuff that let's look into this, let's figure this out, and setting out a plan of, here's my next steps. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come back to you with this. I'm going to come back to you with that. I'm going to look into this. And then straight after that call, I will send the partner an email going, here's what we talked about. Here's what I'm going to be back by Friday. So the other thing I always do is like put a definitive, I'm going to be back by this date, because people respond really well to like the clarity of knowing this is what's going to happen.
Hmm.
Then on the Friday, or it's mostly like on the Thursday, if I know I'm not going to hit that deadline, on Thursday,
Hmm.
I'm saying, here's the progress I've made. Here's what like I'm waiting on, I'm blocked. So I'm not going to have it tomorrow, but I will have it. I've also got people to commit to a deadline internally, and I'll have it by then. So I think like that kind of consistency and clarity for people comforts them, They've also then feel that they've had their moment to vent. So there's therapy in that. But of course, the other thing I do, and anyone who knows me at HubSpot knows this really well, I mostly communicate in voice notes. So, like, because the other thing I love is you can pick up,
Tonality.
the tone or exactly like in a voice note way better than you can on a email. And email is important. Like, I still will use email. It's really, really important, I think, for just clarity. But I try and, kind of mix those things.
It's interesting. And yeah, I think most partners who've been around for a while at least can say they've gotten a voice note from you. I've got one. I don't remember years ago. You don't remember, but I remember because I don't get too many voice notes. But yeah, I do have one. All right, so like look, this has been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed learning a lot about kind of Sarah behind Sarah, I guess you could say. I mean, like the stories behind the name in the inbox and the email threads and the notes online and all that kind of stuff. It's been entertaining to learn. I didn't know you worked in advertising before HubSpot. Do you still go to Burger King and do you still have like flashbacks of the Typo? What are trips to Burger King like, or driving by Burger King like? What's that like? I mean, when you drive by or you go through? I mean, what's the do you
Yeah,
remember
no,
that or?
the other thing I'd say to you is though, if you're making mistakes, the best thing, and I've had the gift of many, many clients on this one, and more importantly, managers. Like, when you make a mistake, what you need is a manager who's going to call you out and give you the feedback and go, like, especially when you don't know what the answer would have been.
Yeah.
Like, we're all trying to figure those things out. I have been blessed in my career to have very direct managers who can give excellent feedback, who've grown my career. I have been blessed. I think through every step of my career, I have had managers who've been really, really good mentors. So I think that's kind of critically important. But the other
Mhm.
thing I've had is excellent partners and customers who, I think, and that's why I think the relational aspect is so important in building relations. If you can do that well, then you can talk about problems in a much more productive way. So no, the Burger King client, I actually was very fond of him. He was very direct.
Ah,
Um,
okay, okay.
uh, I don't have any, I don't have any like trauma about my time with him. He was great, but it was one of those. Just I remember the feeling. I remember that
Yeah,
feeling
yeah, yeah.
well. So no, I still love a Whopper. I still love a Whopper.
Yeah. It was good. I mean, like, I made the mistake at a Burger King one time of ordering ice cream from there. I mean, that was a
Oh,
mistake.
it's gonna be a nightmare.
Yeah, it's called Burger King. It's not called Dairy Queen, right? It's called Burger King for a reason, right? So I mean, anyway. But look, Sarah, listen, I thank you for coming on. I appreciate you doing this. We learned a lot. 999, mistakes, but they all add up. That's the reason why you are who you are. So it's
Well,
just been very, very fun to do this.
thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it, and it's a great topic. And we should talk about mistakes more, and it's for charity for growth.
I agree, and like even on the podcast that you guys do. I mean, owning the outcome. Why don't you share us a little bit about that while we're here?
Yeah, so I love owning the outcome because I get to talk to partners about the things that are close to my heart. One is their businesses and growing businesses. But the other thing is, HubSpot partners play such an important role in HubSpot. I always joke that my analogy around partners is if you buy a smart oven and you don't read the manual, 12 months later, it's a microwave. So I think what partners do is they are telling me I can air fry in it, I can microwave, I can oven in it, and they're giving me recipes of things I can cook in it, and they just make the experience so much richer. And that's why I think HubSpot partners are so critical for customer adoption and retention long term. So I in the podcast, that's what we're talking about is like what are they doing with customers? How are they evolving in this AI evolution? And it's great space for me to learn because partners are very generous with their knowledge, which I love for the ecosystem as well.
Yeah, so definitely. So anybody listening, owning the outcome, you can find it on, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your favorite podcast. It's a good one. Definitely recommend listening to it. Sarah, again, thanks a lot for coming on. And for anybody listening, please share with anybody if you enjoyed listening to Sarah's story. And this has been another episode of RevOps 500. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you.